All right. Well, I guess since we are live, I want to welcome everybody to our preseason Don't Let the Season Bug You Fumigation Webinar. My name's Thomas Jones, Senior Director of Analytical Services here at Safe Food Alliance, and we have a couple of expert guests today to help us with these challenging issues. Our first speaker today will be Deanna Scheff, who's a research entomologist at USDA, and she will be talking about integrated pest management for container preparation. Deanna, take it away.
Oh, wonderful. So hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. So my name is Dr. Deanna Scheff, and I'm a research entomologist. So I'm based out of Manhattan, Kansas, where I work for the USDA ARS in the Center for Grain and Animal Health Center. And so my specialty as my research entomologist is I focus a lot on stored product insects, and those really affecting the agricultural and grain-based products throughout that supply chain. So I'm just going to hit you up with some of the IPM management specifically for container preparation and things to think about as we're moving product through shipping containers, whether it's domestically or on that export market side. So if you aren't familiar, stored product and pests are a very highly diverse community of insects that are associated with stored food and feed products. So roughly we've got 600 beetle species and 34 families, 40 different moth species and 4 families. But as you can see, fortunately, not all of our species are of economic importance pests. So we like to delve down our world of stored product pests to about 12 to 15 specific species that we like to target all of our pest management. And those are basically our insects of concern. So how we do that is our pest importance really depends on insect feeding habits, abundance, rate of increase, the ability to penetrate or invade packaging, which is highly important. But it also has an impact on geographical location. So different pests within the southeast United States are very different than in the northern areas of the United States, and then also across the world. They also go into types of products that are being stored. So we have different species that like to attack wheat products versus a processed cornmeal product. And then also on that tolerance level. So when we go after them with very targeted pesticides, insects just with their species are very different when it comes to their tolerance to different pesticides or some of our applications. Our species also differ in their food preferences, their ability to develop, and how fast they develop. So some of our species can develop as fast as 24 days. Other ones take 35 to 36 days. So they're all, as you can tell, kind of vary a little bit. And then also in their mobility, we've got moth species that can fly tremendous distances. And then we've got other species that don't really move very far. So within all of these, we really like to have an understanding of the species that we're going after and why it matters. So for example here, this is just one of our insect pests. So this is a rice weevil. So a rice weevil is unique because it is an internal feeder. So you only see the adult stage of insects. So in the video on the right, this started at day 0 in our mini insect column that we have here that likes to represent a grain column. We started off with 100 insects. And as you can see, these insects are highly mobile. They're eating our grain product that's in there. And this is a rice product. And by the very end of this is 48 days later, we have well over 1,000 insects, all within that grain column, all alive, all going after that stored grain that we have. So what that really lets us know is that often you might only see 1 or 2 insects, but if they're internal feeders, such as this one, you may have a bigger problem, anywhere from 2, 3, 4 weeks down the road. It can expand quite quickly. So why this kind of really matters. So this is just kind of one example of a potential export supply chain where realistically, this is kind of how we're laying out what may happen in that supply chain. So you start with your destination of origin. So let's, for example, say a rice product here. So at one point we have rice that's harvested, it's stored. At some point it's going to get transported and sit in a warehouse where you can hold that product, you can bake that product, you can actually load it in a container, put it on an ocean freight, and then ship it off. Or I can go from that warehouse to another rail transportation, to another warehouse, to moving down to the ports, and then load it in containers and ship on that ocean freight. overseas. So often this can be any, like 6 months or more within that process where that food product or that grain product is highly susceptible along that supply chain. So things to keep in mind while we're adding this product, whether it's in a rail or, for example, here we have a shipping container, of really looking at that inspection and sanitation aspect that comes to that product that we want to transport, whether it's domestically from California to New York or across the country or to a different destination across the world. So why is inspection and sanitation important? So the biggest things are if you want to look for any holes in that container, whether it's on the side, it's on the floor, it's in these door seals as they're being shut, because these are pathways for insects and rodents to really get into that container and potentially infest your product that you have being stored there or being shipped there. If you have holes in the ceiling or in the sides and you get a tremendous amount of rain, which has been happening quite a bit through the Midwest this year, that could lead to a leaky roof and water damage that can potentially lead to mold and fungal growth into your product. But you also want to look for any leftovers from the previous contents within that container and making sure that it's food safe. So you're not putting your bagged rice, your oranges, your pecans into, let's say, a container that hauled creosote before and cross-contaminate. You also want to have good sanitation, looking for debris, because that'll lead to insect harborage points where insects can feed on that product. They can hide away and then later come out and infest the product that you're moving across. So things to really look for is you want to look at the floor, you want to look at that ceiling, you want to look at that side and try to find areas that you might need to fix. So taking an overall look. So for example, this is what we would call a not great container. As you can see, the sides and the ceiling are dented in. We've got cracks, we've got nails, we've got screws that are sticking up. A lot of that can have an impact on your product as it's being more moved. It can be torn out. These areas could be locations where insects can hide away. And then on the flip side, you can have a fantastic container. This container exactly is 2 years old, where it's in beautiful condition, no dents, no holes, wonderful floorboards. So you can see the whole gamut of that within that supply chain. And those are things that you really want to inspect. And the reason why, because spillage does actually matter. It sounds weird, but insects have this innate ability to be able to find products. So just for a quick example, we did a study with our partner down in Arkansas State University, where we put these screens that you see on the right side that have a sticky substance on them on just natural areas of spillage around rice mills in Arkansas. So we put them out. We did samples from June to October. We literally put these screens out for 48 hours, collected them, and then we really looked at what insects that we captured in that very short period of time. So as you can see, spillage does happen. It's a normal part. These are, again, outside of a railway here, and then some of the processing lines. But as we put these here, as you can see, over June, July, August, September, and October, we are catching insects in less than that 48-hour period. Everything from rusty grain beetles, hairy fungus beetles, Nididulidae beetles. These are some of our most common insects that we're capturing. Anywhere from a low time in July, 20 insects, to 1 year in 2016 in September, we caught nearly 100 insects in that 48-hour period. So having those insect debris, some of that food left over in your container can have a really big impact for where our insects can find and locate them. This is just another example of a facility that we went to with even higher numbers throughout those time points. And these ones here, we caught more specifically on our store product insects, but it's happening in quite a short period of time. So having that inspection, looking for that sanitation, cleaning up any of that product that's left over, those are things that we can help protect the products that are going in there that we're moving across country or across the world. Some other options that we have within that container to help protect the product that's going to be in there. I'm not going to touch on fumigation because that is Spencer. He's going to have a great presentation on that. But for me, I'm going to specifically look at what we call surface treatments. So these are insecticides that we can apply to surfaces, cracks or crevices, spot treatments, or some of those pre-thin treatments, thinking inside of a grain silo. So often we have what we call two major types. One is a general use contact insecticide. So these are designed specifically for flying or walking insects to knock those insects down upon contact of that surface. So one example is Tempo SC, which is a beta-cyfluthrin or pyrethroid product. And then the other type of surface treatments we have are residual insecticides. And these ones are just designed to last for a longer period of time, for weeks or months at a time. And these often contain an insect growth regulator, such as Diacon or Diacon IGR. One just has methoprene, which is supposed to be for juvenile insects. And then we have Diacon IGR Plus, which is methoprene and deltamethrin, both a pyrethroid and an IGR to attack both those adult insects and those larval insects. So how do we look at this in the lab, and how can I make this recommendation to tell you that these things work? This is one example that we've looked at in my lab a couple years ago, where we're looking at two specific products. One is Senset or spinosad-based product. The second one was Tempo or beta-cyfluthrin-based product. What we did is we did an application with our spray nozzles here, where we sprayed them either on metal surfaces, concrete, or an epoxy or painted concrete surface. We exposed our rice weevils or our lesser grain borers on these surfaces for up to 7 days at 3 different temperatures, and we monitored what was happening with our insect species. And what we really look for are either affected adults that which are going to be these ones here on the left, where our insects are not moving, they're knocked down upon extended exposure on that will lead to mortality, versus our normal adult insect species here. Let me shut that one off. There we go. Where nothing's happening on these adults. They're moving around, they're acting normally. So this is typically what we see with our control, where we only spray with water. And what we're looking for is that amount of affected adults and how that happens over time. So specifically for our lesser grain borer, so among all of our treatment combinations, so all of our surfaces, all of our temperatures, we had 99% of our adults were affected or dead after 1 day of exposure on that treated surface. And then by day 7, we had 99% mortality of those adult species. So it was very, very effective against our lesser grain borer. Our rice weevil, we saw a little bit more difference in this species compared to our lesser grain borer. Rice weevils tend to be a little bit more tolerant. And so what we see with that is with our Tempo, 100% affected, again, after 1 day, 91% mortality after 7 days, where the remainder of those insects were just affected, which eventually lead to mortality. Our Senset product, we had a wide variety there. So anywhere from, we had 0 to 99% live adults after 1 day, kind of depending on our temperature and surface. But it's a wide variety for what was happening. We're not really seeing a lot after 1 day. However, after day 7, at our high label rate, we're anywhere from 74 to 100% mortality. At our low label rate, it's 32 to 99%. So there is a variation in there, and that goes to a lot of the insect biology and what's happening. But really what we're seeing is longer exposure time on a treated surface. We have higher mortality. So the next step that we're trying to take with this one is we're actually looking at how this would interact with an actual shipping container as a pre-container spray before we load in any product there. So with this one, we're really looking at Tempo, and then the difference is we're looking at a Gravista product here, which has deltamethrin, methoprene, and a PBO. Specifically, we're looking at metal and wood surfaces that we're actually storing in a shipping container over 12 weeks, focusing in on red flower beetles and rice weevils again. And this one we're actually conducting in Arkansas and Kansas. So we actually started this one about 5 weeks ago with our group down in Kansas, where we created bioassays for metal, which would be the sides of the container, or that wood surface, which would be that bottom, and a roughly 10 by 10 inch area bioassay, where we're doing our insecticide applications like we would do in a container, holding them in a container, and then pulling them out every 4 weeks and conducting similar bioassays to see how that product holds up over time, extended periods, especially in the hot, humid conditions in the summer, and then also the cold conditions in the winter and fall months as well. So like I said, we just started this about 5 weeks ago. So our first experiment finished up last week, and I could report on all of our insects in our bioassays. We had 100% knockdown or affected adults within 1 day, and almost in 99% mortality among both of our insects and both of our surfaces. So it's showing really effective at being at barrier treatment for anything that would be into that shipping container. So on the backside, that also now comes into what we call packaging aspects when it comes to food and food-based products. So our store product insects, not only can they infest our grain that's being stored in a silo, in a bin, in a warehouse, they have this innate ability to either penetrate or invade packaging material. So we like to divide our insects into either penetrators. So these are insects that are capable of chewing through packaging material, as you see here on the top right corner, and in the middle, these are just actual photos of insects chewing through packaging material. And then we also have packaging invaders. So these insects typically will invade packages with existing holes or damage. So on this lower left area here, this was an imperfect heat seal, which started an infestation of pasta. And then on the right side, this was another packaging material that had perforations on it. And as you can see, we start having an insect already trying to find its way through that perforation to infest a product. So needless to say, store product insects are very smart and handy, and it just crazy, drives me nuts, but it's kind of crazy what they can do. So when we do a lot of testing with our insect species, specifically for packaging, looking at integrity, how do we develop better packaging? These are what I would say are the 5 most common insects that I get phone calls about, I get questions asked, I've seen firsthand the damage that they can do. So for our invaders, they're typically red flower beetle or a sawtooth grain beetle. And then our penetrators are typically Indian meal moth, a warehouse beetle, or rice weevil. However, fun fact, invaders can be penetrators, so they can chew through materials if they need to, and penetrators can also be invaders if they find a hole that they can make their way through. So it's a lot easier to invade through a hole than chew through things. So needless to say, they are very smart critters in there as they try to get through our food products. So things to think about and some examples when it comes to packaging and how we package and how we choose our products is we really want to limit the ability of the insects to find a weakness, to find a hole. So for example, this one's on a left side. So this was at a rice producer that was having issues with their rice products becoming infested. So going through the warehouse, kind of seeing what they have, they often take samples. Figus would come in and take samples of the rice to look at the conditions, and they would leave holes like this from the grain trier where they pulled their sample. That is one example of a clear entry point for an insect to find that product. The one here on the top with all these black circles, this was a paper-based material that was holding dog food at the time, and they're having issues. And as you can see, each one of those small little holes was an insect penetrating and actually chewing its way through that paper-based material. Other things to consider is even the stitching on the bags that you use. Anything that's open like this, especially over extended periods of time, can potentially open up, lead for spillage of the product that's on the inside, being attracted for some insects to find that and infest that product. But also inspection is key for any of those products that are coming into your facility. These 2 examples down here, we've got flower beetles and Indian meal moth in that outer wrapping of a packaged product coming into a facility. So looking at inspection and seeing what's happening is very, very key to be able to help protect your product. And then other examples is if insects, again, can't chew through their way, they're going to find all of these small perforations. They're going to find holes potentially made by other insects or just some of that production manufacturing and find their way into your product. And often if insects can't make their way through, but the female can sense that there's a food product in there, she can lay eggs through some of those perforations, and those eggs will hatch and then look at infesting the product within. So recommendations that we're really looking for on that packaging side is making sure to inspect packaging during receiving, even during storage, before loading and transportation, to identify potential infestation before it starts to cross-contaminate into other products, into a larger infestation. If you can catch it early, you can treat it, you can take care of that problem before it expands. being able to minimize perforations in packaging material, so helping to reduce those entry points, utilizing thicker materials, tighter weaves. If you're using a woven-based material, having that nice tight weave does make it harder for the insects to find their way through. Even looking at stitching patterns, heat seals, or using a maze for a glue pattern. And then there's also this opportunity to use an insecticide incorporated packaging. For example, there's a company in the United States called Provision Guard that makes a methoprene product to be able to incorporate into packaging. The nice thing about methoprene, though, in the United States, it's exempt from food tolerance levels. It's registered for treatments across the entire post-harvest supply chain, from empty storage bins to aerosol fogging, stored grain, packaging, all of that. And basically, it's designed to stop and inhibit that larvae from becoming a pupae to an adult to start over that life cycle. So it doesn't kill insects outright, but it's really stopping to prevent that growth and development on insects. But it's also very species specific for what insects that it works on. So for example, we've tested it in my lab numerous of times where we can look at treated, untreated packaging on both internal and external feeders, different species of insects, and kind of see what happens. So for example, rice weevils, since they fully develop on that inside of the grain kernel, we don't see any differences between a treated and an untreated packaging because it's not coming into contact with that methoprene. However, for like our lesser grain borers, where the egg is laid on the outside, egg hatches into a larvae, and then the larvae bores into a grain kernel, we see significant reduction in progeny levels. Red flower beetle, their whole life cycles on the outside of a kernel. They're on processed food. Again, significant reduction. Those larvae stay in that larval stage and don't become pupae or adults. We see the same thing with sawtooth grain beetle. With these ones here, often they'll start to try to pupate, but it causes deformities and then kills those insect species. So all in all, kind of wrapping up a little bit of this IPM and how we can utilize these different tactics for commodities, especially in shipping containers, moving domestically, internationally, is everything that we do in IPM is a holistic science-based process that uses biological, physical, and chemical tools to help identify, manage, and reduce those risks from pests to maintain that overall safety. We want to minimize economic risks, health risks, environmental risks with the decisions and tools that we use. And overall, the great way to think about this is an onion peel or a multi-hurdle approach to IPM. So using multiple methods or hurdles together to reduce the risk from pests across that supply chain. Unfortunately, there's not a silver bullet. There's not one magical cure for everything. But if we can use multiple different techniques, everything from storage, once it's harvested, to package or storage in a warehouse, to shipping containers and shipping it across country, if we can use things like grain protectants, fumigation, pre-container applications, packaging, fogging, all of these tools are in there to help maintain that product, maintain its quality, integrity across that supply chain. Utilizing all together is going to be better than just one tool at a time. So with that, I will kind of stop here because we've got another speaker coming up, but I'm happy to answer any questions now or at the very end. This is my contact information. If you ever have questions today, you think of one next week or the week after, 2 months down the road, I'm more than happy to help have discussions about things that I've known and things that I've seen and we've researched in my lab. Okay. And with that, I will stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Deanna. That was a fantastic presentation. Yes, we can take a few minutes here for questions, and if there are none, then we can then move into Dr. Spencer Walse's presentation. I had a question on the Provision Guard. What is its regulatory status, do you know, in other markets? Is it approved in the EU or Asia?
Yes, so they have different manufacturing facilities being able to produce this product in down in, I believe it's Mexico, South America. We've got some in India, Asia. The nice thing with methoprene is that it's being used and accepted in the EU. It's also accepted by the FAO as an application treatment across the pond as well. Right now, a lot of the manufacturing is here in the United States to make those packaging, but we can produce it here, we can ship it overseas. So it's a really good tool and opportunity that we have to use not only here in the US, but other markets as well.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions? People feel free to use the chat or anything else if you want to unmute yourselves and speak as well. Or you can hold those thoughts and we can go into Dr. Spencer Walse, who has joined us. Spencer, welcome. Spencer is based here in California at the USDA ARS. Many of us in the industry out here know him well. Has a lot of expertise in post-harvest treatments and fumigation. So with that, take it away, Spencer.
All righty. Thank you. Yes. Hey, Deanna, great job. And thank you for pitching in, taking time away from your service there. Thank you. Deanna, I've known her for years, but we've been working together recently for a USAID project in which we're trying, again, kind of this systems-based approach, coupling multiple layers of IPM with fumigation so that we can get our grains overseas where they're needed as safely as possible. And so I think she's made some great points about some very simple things that you can do to containers and storage facilities to help augment pest control efforts. You know, you spend money potentially on fumigation, and yet there are these other things that are relatively simple to do that just help to reinforce that. So yeah, thanks again. I'm going to share here and start a show. So Tom, please let me know, am I up on the screen?
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. So yeah, I'm just going to dive right into it. And again, if there's anybody in the audience that has questions who wants me to focus on a particular fumigant, I'm happy to do so, or update you guys on regulatory status of any of the fumigants. You know, please just post those questions in the chat room, and I can kind of steer the talk to those particular issues. And if I don't hear anything, I'm just going to kind of talk till Tom pulls the plug. So I'm going to start kind of with a couple of slides, basic overview of my program and what we do for you guys. And it really focuses around, global agricultural trade. And in particular, I want to emphasize the increasingly important role that I think these post-harvest tools, and in particular fumigation, are going to play in global trade and ensuring food safety and food security moving forward. And you guys are an audience that knows, predominantly what we grow out in California is intended for export. And the same thing could be said about grains in the Midwest, right? And the beauty of a lab being in Fresno is that we're at the center of specialty crop agriculture, and the beauty of having an ARS lab in Manhattan, Kansas is that's kind of the grain capital. And so you got to understand what folks are doing, and luckily the ARS has labs close to you guys, the growers, to best understand all the nuances that are associated with any given crop. So everything's consumer driven. Unfortunately, there's good and there's bads associated with this. We've got consumers who are just deathly afraid of chemicals, and I just laugh every time I drive by a Dutch Brothers, because apparently people aren't scared of those chemicals, and of course driving by the farm, your Walgreens or your Rite Aid. I mean, people are lining up in droves to buy pharmaceuticals, but for some reason they don't like pesticides, and it's just this thing is just spiraled out of control. We all know it's just a little bit ridiculous. And these systems end at the consumer, right? I mean, cotton candy grapes. I mean, I don't want my grapes to taste like cotton candy, but the kids love them. So and the moms are buying them because the kids love them. And yeah, and again, post-harvest treatments, they're just going to get more and more important, because the lack of residues that result from fumigation, by and large, are consistent with this consumer and regulatory trend towards no chemical residues on the food stuff. Okay, so you guys have all seen this. Well, what I do is focus on the science, but I can't divorce it from politics and economics. You've got to be cognizant of how all these issues kind of interplay and try to interject the science as much as possible. This is a slide that I put out here. Our unit, essentially, this is what we focus in on, is trade. And I like to show this slide because it gives an idea, gives folks an idea of the monetary value associated with what we're talking about. And this is a report, which is basically farm payouts from Washington, D.C., and it's from 2010 to 2019. And the gray is essentially farm payouts for corn and soy in the Midwest, and that was consistent till about $12 billion each year. That's a pretty big chunk of change. And then what happened in of course 2017 is signified in the orange triangle you see there, is of course this trade war with China, and that really impacted specialty crop agriculture and added another, basically by 2019, $14 billion of compensatory payouts. And a lot of us here in California were the recipient of that. So this just puts a number on how important our exports are, and how maintaining that $14 billion is really critical to keeping us going, because we're geared for really trade. And what my group does is we try to stay ahead, allow you guys to stay ahead in this regulatory game. And we have proactively addressed these consumer and regulatory demands for global ag trade. And I really like this. This is a Google Ngram. And what that does is it tracks these Boolean search terms, in this case, the word invasive, over time. I believe this is dating back to the 1800s through 2000. And you guys can see that word invasive really just took off around 1945, which is, of course, when we won World War II and set up all these trade networks to supply the globe. And it's really important to recognize that this was a path that we set down, and with that, we have really created this whole situation with invasives, and it's our job to keep pace with the spread of pests and disease that result from basically a global economy. And there's a lot of people on this planet, and I don't see us steering too far from this course anytime soon. Okay, so we characterize each system. I'm not going to go through the citrus packing, process with you guys, or a prune harvest and pack process. But the point is that the reason we're in Fresno is because we can walk out our back door at the lab in Parlier and interface with you guys, so that we understand what's going on in the field, all the way through the packing, pack out, and then what your trade destinations are, right? We've got to have a pulse on this to keep track of everything. And then, of course, this slide, I don't know if you've seen me talk before, but this is one of my favorites, right? These consumers, it's just fear, right? That's what I call it, at least. And this is a great website. It's the phobia list. And, what are people scared of? They're scared of insects and poisons and radiation and germs and GMOs and chemicals and money. But really, what is the most pathetic thing is that people really have no idea what farming is all about and what goes on a farm, and they don't want to know. So they're scared of knowledge and of farms. And about a year ago, I was back home in Chicago, where I grew up, and my mom had a watermelon, and it was February. And I was like, oh, this is so great. Well, I wonder where this watermelon came from. And my mom said it came from, Dominic's, which was the grocery store down the street. And I'm thinking to myself, like, oh my gosh, my own mom is one of these folks. And I'm like, Mom, they this had to grow someplace warm. Where did you get it? And oh, okay, so it came from Guatemala. She's lockstep with not understanding that getting a watermelon in February takes global trade. so on and so forth, right? Getting citrus or dates in the summertime doesn't happen unless there's this type of trade. And clearly too, you've got these consumers that are driving towards no traditional, let's say, conventional chemicals. Obviously, this is just a marketing kind of gimmick that the chemical companies are starting to take advantage of. It really is kind of laughable because the EPA is demanding less tiers or less stringent regulatory review on these natural products. But of course, we designed the pyrethroids because the pyrethrins didn't last long enough, but now we're going back to the pyrethrins, so we have to apply 5 times more of them, and it's just like a joke. And this is great. If you're a natural products chemist, we have a whole program in that, but it takes time and money. And it's going to be a really, really big challenge to work towards this end. And I could just talk for an hour just on this issue in itself, but keeping in theme with kind of this bigger picture and not getting into the minutia of fumigation. I mean, this is the figure that I think kind of sums it all up, right? This is the human population from the year 1050 to 2022. And we're at a really pivotal point right now because we've always been able to keep up with the demand to feed the planet. And when our plant protection products or pesticides are now just basically getting attacked, we're going to rely on innovation to kind of keep pace, and it's going to take a lot of commitment in order to maintain global food security and food safety when we're losing these plant protection products. And I don't know if innovation is going to be able to do it because we still need to kill these things. This is a cartoon of the system, right? And in our program, and the spirit of a systems approach, or as Deanna described it, this layered onion, you've got to take advantage of everything, whether it's pre-plant GMO or production level control, and post-harvest control, and then even the marketing. And what I want to point out here is that one of the things about post-harvest that's key is it's where the logistics and the infrastructure are centered. And when we conduct a treatment in a post-harvest realm, it allows us to use the chemical much more strategically in a smaller area and have control. And this control is right before the consumer. This would be opposed to, say, something like spraying broad spectrum insecticides in the field, where we might have 2 orders of magnitude in residue coverage on a tree. It's a much more highly variable control step as opposed to a fumigation where there's a lot of reproducibility. And when I sit across and help to negotiate trade, help APHIS in negotiating trade, we want to be able to demonstrate control with as much confidence as possible, and post-harvest fumigations are really how we do that. This is just a figure that shows that, right? I mean, you can run 1,000 fumigations, and the efficacy you get from those 1,000 fumigations are going to be pretty darn consistent. You can fly an airplane over a field, and sometimes you're going to kill it, and sometimes you're not. And so we want to go to the table, so to speak, with as much confidence as possible when we're trying to demonstrate food security and food safety. And so really, these fumigants, they're becoming a golden goose. For the longest time, they were kind of the Pandora's box or the can of worms, and no one really wanted to talk about them. But they are going to allow us to satisfy these current regulatory and consumer demands for not leaving pesticide residue, and for using chemicals more efficiently and steering clear of broad spectrum, basically pesticide use as much as possible, which I don't think is going to be going away. Will allow our beneficials to do a better job. Okay, so the reality is post-harvest fumigants work, and that's because of their chemical properties. They diffuse through our foodstuffs very, very efficiently, as opposed to, let's say, your pyrethrin or your your spinosad, which have no potential once they hit a surface to desorb from that surface and move and cover and coat. All right, so that's the key advantage that's intrinsic to all of these fumigants, and I've got them listed here on the top. Nitrogen, that would of course be associated with the low oxygen approach. And I think they just used it to put somebody down in like Alabama or something. It was obnoxious. But nitrogen, low oxygen approaches. You've got ozone we use for certain things. Phosphine, of course, a staple, probably the second most important agrochemical behind fertilizer today. Carbon dioxide's registered gas, sulfuryl fluoride. Obviously, it's played a huge role in replacing methyl bromide on all of the durables. Sulfur dioxide that goes together with table grapes, kind of like peas and carrots. Can't have one without the other, really. And it's also now expanded into blueberry use. We got methyl bromide, the gold standard. The gold standard is because it's registered everywhere. And fighting and getting registrations or fighting for registrations all over the globe is a big part of expanding away from methyl bromide. We got to have the appropriate registrations in place in the importing countries. Hydrogen cyanide is used for a couple of things and actually used quite a bit in Europe still to this day. Propylene oxide, that is also widely used in the tree nut sector. And then ethyl formate, this is a new one, relatively new, that's going to be registered as an organic moving forward. We've got quite a few fresh fruit applications, and in fact, we're just branching out to looking at it as basically a drop-in replacement for propylene oxide in vacuum chambers. When you get down to Vapona and the pyrethrins, we apply these as fogs, and while they are effective and really important tools, again, they don't have the chemical properties that allow them to really get through bulk commodity easily. And then I've also got listed here these flammability points, and they're of course you have to understand the molecules you're working with and essentially how to use them safely. And hopefully we can add some more chemicals to this list, but it's really an investment, and the registrants of these molecules are global, and that's what it takes to use these effectively. So, kind of in summary here, we've got, because of global trade, we've got increased demands on pest-free security. So we have to use insecticides and herbicides. Because our food safety demands, we have to use antimicrobials. And of course, we really can't use or are highly restricted in the amount and the type of chemicals that we can use. So this is kind of the nightmare that we all live and deal with, and it's our job is in the ARS to try to help you guys through this mess. And with that, I mean, I think we can pause. Tom, I don't know if anybody wants me to focus in on a particular fumigant or questions with sulfuryl fluoride or questions with phosphine or propylene oxide. I think this would be a good time to kind of pause and maybe get some audience feedback. And if there's none, I'll just kind of continue on.
Thanks, Spencer. Folks, do we have any questions right now for Spencer related to any of these specific compounds or uses? Ben Crane has a question. Okay, and what is your question, Ben? It's coming. We're waiting.
Great. Thank you for the question.
Okay, with sulfuryl fluoride having weaker efficacy and MRL issues with propylene oxide and methyl bromide, what options do we have for the European Union?
Okay, so that's a great question. I think that for the time being, sulfuryl fluoride's on very solid ground in the EU. Using it with reduced levels of propylene oxide, a sulfuryl fluoride propylene oxide combination, I think is a very smart approach. And getting those propylene oxide residue data into Codex and approval in the EU is a major focus of what we're doing right now. It's a long, tedious process. The registrant has everything in place and the data generated for the next Codex submission. The toxicology package has already been done. And I think we will ultimately check that box in the EU. I also do recognize, however, with propylene oxide, unfortunately, there's some retail demand to move away from it. And that's really unfortunate because, propylene oxide very uniquely, much like methyl bromide, is able to get micro kill as well as the insect kill. And what our hope is that with the registration of ethyl formate, which is currently at the EPA's Office of General Counsel. So ethyl formate is the ethanolic ester of formic acid. It is about to be registered with the US EPA, and we are in the final throes of California registration. Now, at this time, unfortunately, the registrations are limited to fresh fruit. But we have been funded through the USDA Foreign Ag Service to look at ethyl formate application in vacuum chambers and at normal atmospheric pressure, but first in vacuum chambers, essentially as a propylene oxide replacement. And relative to propylene oxide, which forms the bromo and chlorohydrin, which are of relative residue or regulatory concern to the EU, ethyl formate breaks down into formic acid and ethanol, which are both organic. And we really think that the EPA is going to eventually allow an organic registration of ethyl formate. And we just need to dial in the dosage so that we can apply enough ethyl formate to kill the microbes and also lepidopteran larvae. So if there's ethyl formate, there's nothing better than it on mites and a lot of the kind of surface pests. If it has a limitation right now, it's lepidopteran larvae, which is of course not good for the for the tree nut sector because of navel orangeworm and codling moth. But under vacuum, I'm very confident that we're going to be able to make it work. And I'm hoping we get enough micro knockdown, to make it worth everybody's while. And so that's what's in the queue. And really excited about this. We're focused our initial efforts on the walnut industry, but the almond industry and the pistachio industry will quickly radiate out to them after this first year of projects are completed. So EU is always tough. I think SF is on really good footing right now. Not only are we maintaining the registration in the EU, which is critical, we lose that registration of SF in the EU, and the EU has decided it will no longer grant import tolerances for any chemicals that are not registered there. So we're maintaining sulfuryl fluoride. We've come up with scrubbing technologies that will be able to limit its emission into the atmosphere, which will be critical to retaining that registration in the EU. Propylene oxide, we are moving that forward to get regulatory compliance ultimately. And then we're looking at ethyl formate as an alternative. So that kind of summarizes the efforts towards the EU and dried fruit and tree nut sector. And hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you, Spencer. Karen has a question as well. She's wondering, I think she's very interested in the ethyl formate, and Where can it be purchased, or a similar product for a small business focused on organic and vegan foods? And I think you've kind of answered that already. It's going through the process, but it's not widely available yet, correct?
That's right. And right now, ethyl formate's being registered as it's going to be a biopesticide. And now in the U.S., getting organic registration, it takes some money. I do think because formic acid, ethanol, and ethyl formate previously were all recognized as GRAS, or generally recognized as safe, I think it's got a very compelling case for gaining an organic registration. But I'm really glad you answered that, or asked this question too, because I actually, even in that long-winded response to the first question, forgot to talk about, I think, probably the most promising or organic option that we've got right now. And it's low oxygen, and in particular, low oxygen packaging. If you'd like to reach out, maybe, after this is done through email or telephone, Tom's got all my contact info. We can talk about some bulk packaging. We're talking like 900 kg totes type packaging for low oxygen storage that I think are really, and smaller, and even retail packaging. We know what the low oxygen requirements are to control the pests. We are currently starting to partner with industry and the almond board in particular to acquire the data to then I'll present to APHIS and trading partners these low oxygen packaging based organic treatment options. Right now, all you guys have is essentially it's like a 22-day cold treatment, which we know works, but is relatively energy intensive. And so we've been focused quite a long time on low oxygen techniques, and really what we've been waiting for is the development of the packaging that will allow us to do that. And now that we have that type of packaging material, again, we need industry's backing to approach APHIS, to approach the key trading partners, to get your Japan and Korea and the foreign countries to accept this. But as far as approaching retailers with pest-free product, I think that is within this sphere of opportunity now, and I'm we can talk about that later.
Thanks, Spencer. It looks like Karen wants to get your information as well on that, so she's definitely interested. Appreciate it. Just curious, both you and Deanna, I know this year it seemed like we had more than our usual share of issues with infestation in international shipments. Do you have any insights on that, or what are your 2 cents worth on that issue? I know the industry has been kind of struggling with it and trying to get a handle on it.
Well, certainly out in California, and I don't know what the situation was in the Midwest, where I think they, it's such a breadth of area in the center of the country. Their weather, can vary from region to region, et cetera. But if somebody were to ask me why this was an unusually bad navel orangeworm year, I would say because it's so wet, and these insects. They need the moisture, and fortunately, out in much of the Central Valley, we've got this desert, and that really helps knock down a lot of insects. Well, my neighbor was just talking the other day about last June, and how it was like raining and still cold last June, and we had all that water everywhere, and I think the moisture really helped to sustain the population of navel orangeworm, and I think that's what we're looking at for the most part. All the insects, but in particular, that extra moisture really seems to help them.
Thanks, Spencer. Deanna, do you have any insights on what we might have been facing?
Yeah, so the Midwest has been, I would notice over the last year, we didn't really traditionally had a cool down like we did before, especially with weather, specifically in Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, a lot of those grain-based regions. So we struggled with having that cold season come through and really knock down the pest pressure. specifically in Kansas, I know we had drought conditions last year, which is crazy. And then a lot of our producers are now not growing wheat anymore. They're now going into corn and corn harvest, and it's more money on that side. So there's a lot of products that are being held longer than typical. And I think that's leading to some of our products waiting for markets to change and to be more valuable. So those are some of the things that we're starting to see, specifically kind of in the Kansas and the Nebraska region, more for those durable, hard commodities and stuff. But this year it's completely opposite. So we've had a crazy spring started into the summer where we're getting rain it seems like every single day. So now we're dealing with other kind of issues on that side of it too. When you have those humid, wet conditions, now we start having the fungus feeders starting to have more pressure, insects moving around a lot more. So we're definitely noticing a lot more changes that are happening within the commodities that are being grown and being stored for different periods of times that they're just not typically stored for.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know that there's been a lot of speculation too in the logistics chain with some of the specialty crops coming out of California that some of the destinations also are warmer than they typically have been as well, and so there may be challenges with insect control there that have not been seen previously, as well as delays in shipping. So, to your points, both of your points, I think it all adds up. So you can't really just focus on one single thing. You really have to keep your eyes open on all of these aspects. We're nearing the end of our hour here. Any more questions?
Tom, maybe while you're fielding other questions, I would add to that, right? So it sounds like what Deanna's describing in the Midwest is kind of what we just went through, right? And when you start sitting on a relatively wet product that's got a little longer in the tooth, your diligence and stored product protection really needs to step up its game, and doing proper fumigation and proper storage sanitation becomes all the more critical. And I guess that's what we're here talking about.
Indeed. Any more questions? Questions, comments, hopes, fears? Well, I'm kind of curious. What is your? John Kimball's got a question. Mr. Kimball. Sometimes products leave California in good condition, and shipping combined with extended overseas storage leads to eggs hatching and insects issues overseas. Yes, that's been a common lament. Any comments on that? Maybe the packaging technologies discussed will help with that.
Yeah, I would say some of the packaging things that are in there, things that Spencer had mentioned before, like we're both kind of working with USAID and their whole supply chain. They're basically having the problems that you just described there. So I think having what we call like those multiple areas in there. So if we can do a really good fumigation, do the monitoring, making sure we're hitting the concentration times that we need to, but also having in some of those pre-container treatments for any migration of insects moving around, some of those packaging options in there are some of those other tools that can help protect that product more long-term than just a fumigation, hoping we kill everything and then you have that extended period. And then the hard part is what I've noticed in conversations that we can control a lot in the United States, but once it leaves the United States, we don't have a lot of control where things are going and being stored. But being vigilant on those places where you're importing, having an IPM program with them, and even the monitoring that aspect for what's going on there, I think would help and get some better opportunities to protect that product.
Thanks, Deanna. It seems like also John Kimball added, traditionally vacuum packaging is sometimes used to address this. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd say vacuum packaging is good. I mean, Spencer, you might have a little more aspect to that one.
Yeah, so the deal with vacuum packaging, absolutely, and even any of the nitrogen flush type packaging is going to help. You really got to get the oxygen down below 2%. And actually, when you get the oxygen below 2%, the most susceptible life stage are the eggs. So a lot of folks will take it from the oxygen from 20 down to maybe 8 or 5 because it takes a little bit of time. But Some of these companies I'm talking about can get down to 2% pretty quickly. And once you're in that region, you're really gonna knock down the eggs. And the other thing is, you can always reach out to me or reach out to Tom. You got to really do good fumigations, and for sulfuryl fluoride in particular, which has become a real important methyl bromide alternative. If you have the opportunity to go low dose over a long period of time, I highly recommend that. Many of particularly at warmer temperatures, many of the beetle eggs hatch very quickly. And there's nothing better than sulfuryl fluoride on post-embryonic. The moth eggs can sometimes take, 6, 7, 8, 9 days to hatch, and clearly they're pretty are relatively prevalent, right? So the slide you're looking at right now, our big lepidopteran or moth pests are coming in from the field, and it creates a really interesting challenge because we've got to disinfest those things right away. And if you get an opportunity to do multiple fumigations separated by, a week or so with sulfuryl fluoride at lower doses on your product, that's really the way to go. And industry by and large has had to learn to adapt kind of its fumigation pattern to dovetail better with sulfuryl fluoride's properties. It's hard to reach everybody in industry though, and so if you have any specific questions, again, we can help, or I can type up kind of like a bulleted point on how to best use SF. When it comes to phosphine treatments, you just go as long as you possibly can, and that's going to be your best bet. I know things are time sensitive in these market crunches, and so there's special kind of tricks we can do to when you're really short on time. But the bottom line is if you've got the time, use it, and that should help eliminate a lot of these issues. And then if you're really interested in getting into these low oxygen packaging situations, that really helps knock down the eggs.
Well, we have one more question and a comment. What can we do if proper sanitation and fumigation, SF, is being conducted, but we're still seeing insect pressure in the facilities? And the last one is, can we get methyl bromide back?
Well, I will. The first one, it's tough. It says, like Deanna said, you got to have a variety of tools, and you got mating disruption, and you've got crack and crevice, you've got all this stuff, and the bugs are out there, and it's a constant battle. I wish everyone the best of luck in doing this, and if it's a real serious situation, you can use Vapona fogs and kind of knock all these things down. And with respect to methyl bromide, I certainly, if I could wave a magic wand, I would. I am a huge fan, and do a lot of my job is dedicated to continuing to be able to supporting the continued use of methyl bromide in quarantine and pre-shipment capacities. It's a bummer, particularly for pre-plant, but we're doing what we can to keep it in the toolbox. It's the expansion of its use, I would say, is highly unlikely, but it's unfortunate.
Thanks. We have one last question here for Deanna about the impact of tornado weather outbreaks affecting any of the pesticide tests from other air from different states blowing over the area. Interesting question.
That's a first one I've ever heard of. I mean, potentially, but yeah, I don't know. I've never actually really thought about that. Yeah, it's been let me put it this way. It's been a rough Kansas year. Oh, yeah, but I'm hopefully it's not. I mean, often, like, if you start seeing things in the field and doing things properly, they're timing it, they're watching out for the weather. For me on the military side, right? So I also do aerial spray on the military side, and that's the number one thing we always have to worry about is weather and drifting and all of that. So I hope not. Like, I think we're doing good. But if we can cut out tornadoes, please, like, my house would thank you, my yard would thank you, my cars would thank you at this point. Oh man.
I love it. Yeah. And one final comment from John Kimball. He said, we found signage to be ineffective against insects. It just says no insects allowed, but apparently they can't read. Okay, folks. Well, we're a little over the hour. If there are no other questions, thank you all for being here. Deanna, Spencer, thank you for your expertise and your contribution. We appreciate it greatly. And I believe everyone will be getting copies of the presentations as well. We've had some people ask for those. So thank you very much. And I think with that, we are adjourned.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Deanna.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.